Okay, everyone, will go ahead and give everyone about 5 minutes just to come in and everything. If everyone can just kind of just drop in the chat, what they're excited to kind of learn about or just what their main takeaway, from this training would be, that would be greatly appreciated.
And please understand, we do intend for this to be interactive. So please don't make us treat this like class and just randomly call on folks. But we do want to talk to you. We do want this to be interactive, and we appreciate you giving us of your time today.
We'll definitely be learning something new, today. And if it's something new that it may challenge an idea that you already had. It may be something that's like, wow, I never thought of it that way. But again, I hope everyone can go ahead and just find a takeaway. And if you notice like, well, I actually want to talk to, Charles, and Jamie about this a little further. At any point, you can go ahead and email us. Our emails will go ahead and be given throughout the training today as well. It will be a slide later on today that goes ahead and just shows both of our emails. So you can go ahead and reach out to us.
And Elizabeth, I see what you're saying. I think part of when you hear Charles and I talk about our journeys, you'll hear us be able to talk to some of that. May not be able to talk completely to it in this situation, but I think it's something to take note of. And maybe it's something we'll come back to at another time, just in terms of how navigating these old rooms and these old situations. Yeah, Tina, I'm not sure about that. I try to talk to young folks all the time and they don't get. No, I'm just teasing. It can be interesting, but I appreciate that. Yeah.
Jessica, I do love that, going ahead and learning how to dismantle stereotypes so we can empower our male students. Yes, like this conversation is about, not only our experience, but how can we take our experience, here and empower other male students, going forward from all cultural backgrounds.
And Mark, I think we'll be able to get to that maybe toward the latter part of what we're talking about, because that'll take us a little bit in a different direction, because I think when we speak to conversations, what's appropriate or inappropriate can be based on that culture of the audience and the culture of the environment, rather, meaning how is the office situated, what's established. But we can talk to that, because I'd like to get a little bit more of that. Okay. All right, Justin, I see you. Okay.
Okay. So I want to go ahead and just give it one more minute just to make sure everyone is all here and everything, and we'll go ahead and get started. I'm loving just some of these takeaways that we're hoping to have, in the chat and everything. And again, with this particular conversation, it's going to spark a lot of different interests, and at some point where it's like, wow, I want to dig deeper into a particular topic that we do not touch on today, please reach out to myself, Jamie, and, and that way, hey, that can be a conversation we can have later on. And as you all do know, this is part of the Transforming Workplace Conversation series. So this conversation just doesn't stop here. So this is going to be a series that we continue to go ahead and build, and maybe some of the things that are brought up today, we can go ahead and build into our later conversations going forward.
And Jacqueline, that's where your comment is very important. And it's also one of the things that how we got to this point of how people have spoken to us. And when I say us, both Charles and myself, to get to this, to understand. So understanding different cultures, when you look at it, not only from a socioeconomic dynamic, but also just a different cultural background. So that's important as well. So we're, if you can tell, we're a little excited, a little nervous about this, because this is something that is near and dear to both of us, but we'll be sure.
Okay. With that being said, we can go ahead and get started here. So just to go ahead and go over our agenda here. So we're going to go ahead and play a video first, just to go ahead and just get your attention. And we'll like to really again, want this to be a very interactive experience and want you all to feel that we're in person. So getting this video to just provide a framework of our conversation today before we get into anything. And then we're going to talk about who are we, like who is Charles English, who is Dr. Jamie Campbell, and why are we even talking to you? And then going ahead, how do we get to where we are? Like, what does that even look like? What does that pathway even look like? And what are some things that we're still experiencing, in these particular pathways? And then we're going to talk about some misconceptions about Black males and just maybe males in general that may be happening in social services, education, and et cetera. And then number 5, why seeing us helps. So when I say why seeing us helps, why seeing myself and Dr. Jamie Campbell here? Why seeing males in general in education? Why seeing males in social services? Why does seeing males in general help? And then lastly, we're going to open it up for questions and open discussion. At any point, you all want to go ahead and just put questions throughout the training, please go ahead and do so, as we do have Lovely Ann, as they are going to be moderating the chat and just providing feedback when needed at that time. But without further ado, I will go ahead and start with our video.
I was 9 years old the first time I was called the N-word by a white person, and it happened during a kickball game of all places. And once I learned the word's meaning, I didn't come to the immediate conclusion that people would hate me due to something outside of my control. I figured it was my fault, that I needed to do a better job in order to be accepted by white people. And with that in mind, growing up, I was the preppy kid. I was so well-spoken and articulate. I got good grades and I checked every box of being a non-threatening Black kid. And yes, there's a checklist for that. But it didn't matter. A good amount of people still hated me or judged me due to my skin color, and it was demoralizing. However, in high school, I had a talk about it with one of my white friends, and he said, the way people feel about you has everything to do with your personality and not your skin color. To me, you're just a ween. And then he hit me with this. I don't think racism is real. So as I maneuvered and grew up in my predominantly white Western Massachusetts town, I kept hearing what my friends said. I kept thinking to myself, racism's not real. Racism's not real. Racism's not real. So when a white owner of a video game store made me empty my pockets because I fit a profile, I figured it was my fault for looking like a criminal. When a white girl I really liked said she really liked me, but said her parents would never allow her to date someone like me, I figured it was my fault for not being nice enough or smart enough in their eyes. In other words, I had Inge living inside of me at all times. And what is that? It stands for I'm not good enough. And yes, we've all dealt with Inge before, right? But the difference is that when everyone around you tells you that you're not good enough, you may start to believe it. I know it was the case for me and for many people of color throughout America. But as I stand here now, I'm finally awake. I know, yes, that every success or failure is ultimately up to me, sure. But I also know that racism is the most persistent and pervasive problem in American history. I lost touch with that high school friend, but if I could see him now, I would tell him how racism has impacted my life negatively due to the expectations and fear that come from it. And it starts with expectations. Oh man, when I was a new dad, I went to Starbucks with my daughter, and just to get some much needed caffeine, right? Every new dad can appreciate that. So a white woman, an older white woman, came up to me and she's like, hey, like, wow, your kid's so cute and all that. I was like, yeah, she is. And then she's like, you know, it's not often that I see Black men out with their kids, but it's such a wonderful thing to see. No matter what happens, and she hit me with this, I hope you stay involved in that little girl's life. And man, I wish I had a clap back for her. Like, I just froze and I was like, oh, yeah, sure, thanks. And Then she left with a smile so big as if she was a superhero named Captain Caucasian, who just saved the world from a black man becoming a deadbeat dad. Ay, 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 yo, the microaggressions, they're like death from 1,000 paper cuts, and it's all because society doesn't think we're good enough. And I've heard them all. It's like, hey, Dwayne, you went to that college? Wow, that's a really good school. So you obviously played a sport, right? You don't even act black, Dwayne. I wish they could all be like you, Dwayne. Yes, yes, yes. I've heard them all. But it's not just the microaggressions. It's the expectations of black men as criminals that's also unnerving. And I have to chuckle at this too, because a dozen white dudes could pass by a white mom.
Okay, so I want to go ahead and stop it right there and everything. That video is actually 15 minutes long and everything, and I only want to go ahead and show the first 5 minutes. The reason I want to go ahead and show the first 5 minutes is because exactly what he said is what this conversation is about. It is why this conversation is so important to go ahead and have today. The adversities, the harmful language, the just stereotypes that are put on men in general, especially men of color, is absurd. And this is something that we do have to navigate on a day-to-day basis. So with that being said, I want to go in and tell you, who are we? And I will go ahead and let Jamie go ahead and take it over first.
So basically, what you'll see in front of you, you'll see my full title, and I work at the Pennsylvania State University. But what's more important, and just like you heard the gentleman just say in the video, that I'm a girl dad. So this idea of how we speak to males, it may seem like, well, why does he care? Because for those males, if my daughter's choices are, they may have a different perspective on how they're supposed to speak to other people. It's our job on a whole to make sure that when we're talking, we're not worrying about stereotypes, or we're not looking at this, creating this idea of stereotype threat, but we're engaging, we're talking, we're communicating, and we're dispelling some of these myths. So as you see, when we keep going through these files, going through our slides, you'll understand a little bit more about us. But this is who I am now. This wasn't who I was then. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to let Charles take over, but definitely excited to be here today.
Perfect. With that being said, this is who I am. Yes, some of my staff are here from the Center for Success Network, which I'm very grateful to go ahead and have you all here. I'm Director of Equity and Social Responsibility for Center for Success. I'm also a lifeline crisis worker for the Trevor Project. And most importantly, I'm the oldest sibling of 4 sisters, growing up in a single parent household, which is my mom. That's my foundation and that's who I am. And honestly, out of everything on this particular slide, the last one is the most important to me. And honestly, but people wouldn't see that. People wouldn't think that would be the most important. People wouldn't think that that would even care. However, without that foundation, honestly, I wouldn't be who I am today. So now you may ask, like, okay, we told you our titles, we told you who we are and everything and all these great things, but like, how did we get here? You all, this particular path, whatever we want to call it, was not easy, it was difficult. There were a lot of adversities, a lot of just challenges, and just similar to the video that we experienced, Jamie and I were told the exact same things. Oh, you all did this. Oh, you all are here now. How did you do that? So let's talk about how we even got here.
So as you can see from my background, I went to school in Atlanta, and I went to Morehouse College. It was the college where many people said, well, you're already Black. Why are you going there? It's in the South. Why would you go down there? And understand, I'm not a small town person, even though I live in one now. I'm originally from the Bronx, New York. And so that came with some stereotypes, some stigma. I grew up during Dinkins, well, really during Koch, Dinkins, and Giuliani. I grew up with the idea that sitting in front of your stoop was a threat because you weren't supposed to be there because there might be a broken window in the building across from you. I grew up in a situation where the idea of going to a college, especially an HBCU, wasn't the preferred thing. But because I had a guidance counselor and a godfather who definitely talked to me about what college meant, because again, I am first gen. The only thing that mattered to my parents, they were excited about me going to college, having the opportunity, because they put these things in front. But all my buddies did not. And when I said I was going to Georgia, everything shut off because they couldn't understand why I would want to leave New York. When I graduated from Morehouse, I went back to Central Michigan University. I went to Central Michigan University while in Atlanta, so I am a product of those extended learning programs. I am a product of actually having to work and go to school, which again made people say, why would you go back and get another degree? You have a decent job, everything is going accordingly. I just recently got married, but I decided to go back. Now I am a graduate, and as of today, officially, everything has been cleared, signed, sealed, dotted, and documented. I am officially Dr. Jamie Campbell with the university's blessing. People said, why did you go back and get a PhD? I still have no real idea. It was something they told me I needed. But I have a PhD now. But when I walk out of the building, when I am dressed accordingly, and this, the shirt and tie, like bow tie thing, that's today. When I am dressed in my hood and sweats, I always have to be concerned about how I look and how I sound to people, not how people sound to me. We're talking today about conversation. We're talking about communication. What does it mean? And we understand that most conversation, most communication is nonverbal. What am I seeing? What am I reading? When an officer stops me and he immediately puts his hand on his hip, he doesn't worry about that first degree, that second degree, or that third degree. He doesn't worry about those 3 little girls that depend on me. He just looks and sees and feels a way that he can speak. When I'm in an office or at an office meeting rather, and someone says, well, you're not really this because you didn't do this, even though my qualifications, my abilities have expressed that I am beyond most people. We understand that we work within 110% rule. Well, many African-American males do, which means they always have to be 10% better. And this is really for people of color, better than what they think they have to be. They have to be a little bit more quiet, a little bit more humble. How are they going to engage and what are their peers going to say? So this goes back to, I think it was Mark, when you said speaking appropriately. It is about understanding when to take that mask on and off, and Du Bois called it that dual consciousness. It's understanding how to navigate these different things. So through my educational process, you will see this is a part of how I became who I am currently. And Charles, I'll push back to you.
Thank you, Jamie. And for me, I don't have a luxury of saying that I'm Dr. Charles English. I don't have that particular title. You know, for me, I started in high school. I went to Cass Nickel High School here in Detroit, Michigan, you know, and then I went to the Pennsylvania State University. I was the first student from Cass Nickel High School to go to the Pennsylvania State University in over 10 years. And it was like, Charles, you're going there and everything. Why aren't you going to the Michigan schools and everything? I did apply to the Michigan schools, got accepted to all the Michigan schools. I did. However, I knew going to Penn State was different. I knew I wanted to go ahead and be different. And honestly, what fueled me to go to Penn State was everyone telling me that I couldn't go. You don't belong there. Why aren't you going to a HBCU? That's a white school. Like, you're not going to be accepted. It's going to be hard. Okay, I live in America. That's my everyday experience. So why am I running away to something that may be better than me in the future? That may go ahead and give me the tools that I need to go ahead and succeed. Why am I going to go ahead and just be scared? And going to Penn State is how I'm here today. This is how the intersection became between ASOE and myself, how I know Jamie, like how we're able to go ahead and have a particular conversation. You know, coming from Cass Nickel High School and going to Penn State honestly was a culture shock, was the biggest culture shock that I could even imagine. You know, being in a predominantly Black city, going to predominantly Black high school, like going to Penn State and not seeing myself represented was hard. It was difficult. And then interacting with students, and it was like, well, Charles, like, you're Black, but like, you're gay though. So like, you're not like the rest of them. Like, you're really cool. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. But that wasn't the same experience that I felt in high school. Me being gay, me being Black, I was still a Black man. Everyone treated me as such. There was no difference. But going to Penn State, me being gay eliminated my Blackness. I was told, by a previous employer, by, the community of Penn State, verbatim, that's what it was. Me being Black, me being gay, really just like, you're just more acceptable. You're okay. You're pretty cool and everything. And I'm like, oh, okay. And those are the lens, or the eggshells in a way that I really had to walk on going forward, because I was like, oh, well, how am I supposed to really navigate this predominantly white institute at this particular time, being these two marginalized identities? Am I not supposed to acknowledge my Black side because I'm gay? Am I just supposed to just be this version of gay that they think that I'm supposed to be? And it was just hard. And then being in college, was when I got my first male straight friends, my first male straight friends. And it was like, wow, this means a lot to me, because in the Black community, in some communities, me having a straight male friend is not ideal. You can't, if you like them. A whole bunch of other misconceptions really come out of that, and it's frustrating. But with this particular person, we were able to grow and bond, and it was amazing. However, it became frustrating us being in certain situations, in certain environments, and I noticed the complete disparity between the both of us. They treat me so friendly, so cool and everything. I'm so approachable. Everyone wants to come talk to me, but they don't go talk to him. They don't want to go talk to him. And it was mind-boggling to me, because I was like, he's real cool. We're the same person. But here's the difference. He was straight. He's 6'5". Charles is gay. He's 5'8". A height difference and a sexual orientation difference eradicated a whole bunch of different things. Now he's an aggressive Black man, and Charles is really cool. Being at Penn State and just well, I really wish other, Black individuals were like you. Very similar to, the video we saw earlier. Wow, I didn't know you could do that. Me working inside the school systems. My name is Charles English. I don't have a typical, let's quotation marks, a typical Black name. So I get talked about my name. Me being in Center County, Pennsylvania, I was told in one school district that my name wasn't Charles English, you all. They called my boss in front of me and asked, was this brown boy Charles English? That's the reality of it, because of the way I look didn't match my name. My actions don't match the typical Black person. Oh, Charles, you're really cool. You can be really Black. Oh, you're from the city? People are so confused that my roots, I'm from Detroit, Michigan. I am from a major city, just like if I was from Philadelphia, if I was from New York, if I was from Chicago, that same connotation goes there. But y'all, because I act the way that I act, and I'm so, I'm so preppy, I identify as gay, those stereotypes don't really affect me. And as you see here, I have to be continued for my educational journey. In certain spaces I go into, that makes a difference. Because I only stopped at my bachelor's degree, I'm not respected, or my work that I do is not respected because I don't have that particular education. Jamie and I, yes, are both Black men, but Jamie now has a privilege that I don't have. It may be respected in other spaces that I may not be respected in. And it's frustrating. And so to have these intersections, to be in these marginalized identities, it's a lot kind of goes into play, as well as how do we show up for these individuals? What does that look like? How, at the end of the day, some of these are just biases and stereotypes that we've been conditioned to go ahead and think. However, going forward, how do we go ahead and interact with them? How are these biases and stereotypes showing up going forward? And what does that even look like?
And so when you look at these words, a lot of times this is what they've seen or that are said about males. And understand, I said young and old, because no matter what age range you go into, these words can be applied to diversity males across the board. In particular, though, Charles and I focused on the African-American side of it because that is who we are. This is a part of who we are. It doesn't make up our whole, but it's a part of us. And I can tell you that I've had people to say, classmates who are supposed to be learned folk, say, you're angry. But in another person, another hue, they would say they're passionate. They would say I'm aggressive, and not the aggressive of a positive, but the aggressive of, oh my God, you're threatening. And Charles gave you the example of the height and size differential. That comes into play, especially when you're one of two persons in a classroom, or you're one person in an office space, or you tower over people. The idea of emotion is closed off, non-communicative, uncaring, violent. When talking to people, these are the things that are often said and communicated just by how you move. That engagement of Black males don't. They don't talk. Really, that's not the right answer, because we do talk. We communicate with each other. We communicate in close quarters, because there's a level of safety when you're talking African-American male or Black male to Black men. When they're speaking outside of their friend groups, oftentimes they don't know who they're talking to or who is going to be the one to turn on them later. From community to community, it takes time to build up trust before conversations can even happen calmly, effectively, and calmly and effectively. So when you're talking about how to speak to your students, some of these things means you may have to share some of who you are. When you're speaking to your students, you may have to give them the benefit of allowing them to rant, to be mad, to be unhappy. It is okay to validate their feelings sometimes. And this happens in the workplace as well. Remember, when you hear people say, oh, I can't talk to him, he's always got something negative to say. How do you not know that that may not be his working process? He may work from dark to light. He may work from negative to positive, pulling away and stripping barriers until he can get somewhere. Well, he just seems like he doesn't care. He doesn't seem passionate about what we're doing. It's not that he's not passionate. It's not that he's not caring, but he, for lack of a better way to say it, may feel like I need to be analytical. I may need to look at this from a pragmatic standpoint, because think about how your African-American males are engaging with the workplace. Think about what they're doing, what they're trying to accomplish. They may already have the stereotypes about how you're perceiving them already before you utter a first word, before they utter a first word. What they're doing is trying to take everything into account. They're trying to take everything into account so that they understand how to speak to you. Think about those people that you know from different communities. Black, white, red, green, aquamarine. Think about how they interact with you after they get to know you. Think about your first experience, like that first impression. Did you think they were standoffish? Did they think they didn't talk? Or did they come off just warm and sociable? How did you perceive them? Because again, we're talking about communication. We're talking about how to communicate with these males from different groups, different cultures. And understand, we're also talking about how these males are heard, how these folks are responded to. If when you're talking to them, do you always kind of give the, is it, I'm not sure? Then they know when they come to you, talking to you means you already have your mind made up to what happens next. So Charles, I'm going to go into Charles is going to talk a little bit about how seeing us plays more of an active role. And that's important with communication because, again, when we're talking, you not only have to see the person, but you have to hear the person, but your body language, how you respond to individual students or workers. Because people are people. But understand, you have to acknowledge where they've been, what kind of cultural aspects they've been going. Charles, I took a little longer there, but go ahead.
Totally fine, totally fine. I'm going to leave this particular slide up really quick before I go into my next slide here. But for this particular conversation right here, just brings up, a lot of us may have seen this whole culture iceberg, like kind of picture before. It's like the little iceberg in the water and talks about like that surface level culture and then that deeper level culture and what that even looks like and everything. Sometimes there's more to a person in general, no matter where they come from. And I love like just the analogy of angry versus passionate, just for example, right now, when we think of Black men, unfortunately, some of us think of violence. We do. As another Black man, if I'm seeing someone like argue in a work setting and everything, I'm not thinking they're angry. For me, being a Black man, I'm thinking they're passionate because I know that's what it is. But for someone on the outside who doesn't understand that level of culture or that deep level of understanding, of course you're going to have these biases and stereotypes. It makes logical sense. One thing that I do at my agency here at the Center for Success Network, in one of our particular trainings, we go over two particular terminologies. And one is overall cultural competence, and cultural competence is simply the ability to go ahead and interact effectively with people of different cultural backgrounds. Cool. We can all pretty much, kind of dab, to, kind of be able to do that in a way. However, that's not the end goal. And I think that's where we get stuck on. We're like, well, I know they're people. I'm going to treat them like people. I'm going to treat them like a man. I know they're Black. No, we want to go and focus on cultural humility. Having a sense that one's knowledge of another person's culture is limited. You may know that they're Black and everything, but you don't know why they're angry. You may not know unless you ask. So again, we want to go ahead and focus more towards the getting over like, oh, I know all about them, to like, I don't know as much in everything. And maybe I should go ahead and just, instead of reacting, how can I go ahead and learn more? What can I go ahead and do to be like, hey, what's going on? Because we give that same grace to everyone else, but to a certain demographic of people, we don't do that. Why?
And so as Charles is transitioning, I wanted to touch on the word toxic, because we always toss toxic with masculinity and we say, oh, they're hyper aggressive. Remember, for a lot of these communities, one of the things, and Charles said it in his example, is that their manhood a lot of times has been denied. Charles is a grown man. They said, who is that boy? He was going to help someone out. Who is this boy, Charles English? My father-in-law would tell me when people would call him boy as a grown person. The idea of, oh, he's just toxic masculinity. No, in some cases, he may need to stand in that idea of being a man because it's been taken away from him for so long. So understand when you're speaking to him, sometimes if the words are perceived based on action, it could be perceived as you're talking down, you're taking that from me. And in that space, you may say, oh, well, he's toxic, I can't talk to him. This is him maybe trying to assert himself and not understanding how to do it appropriately or what you would deem as appropriate. Sorry about that, Charles. I had to get that out.
Totally fine. And to really kind of build on what I just said in regards to cultural competence, cultural humility and everything, in order for, us to live in a society where, all races, all identities can, feel safe expressing themselves, we need to go ahead and move to a level of cultural safety. And that's simply where individuals can, be in an environment socially and emotionally that is safe for them to go ahead and express themselves, where these stereotypes are not being reinforced. People are showing up with empathy. People are just understanding and everything. It's very hard sometimes when we're human. A lot of information that we come into encounter with and everything is unconscious. A lot of things, start with the cycle of socialization as kids. So these things are reinforced as kids. So being 30, being 40, being 50, however old that we are in this particular space right now, it's challenging ideas that have been ingrained in us from the beginning of time. And then we look at TV, we look at the news, and how are these males being, what are they? Like, what does it look like? And before I go to the next slide, I want, if everyone can go ahead and put in the chat, but I want everyone to go ahead and tell me how many male teachers or how many Black teachers have you had in your entire educational career? And just drop a random number in the chat.
One.
Loving this, so we see that there are male teachers, some of us have had some male teachers, but the common theme is none were Black, none were people of color and everything. And honestly, guess what? Black male teachers are made up 1.3% of all teachers in K through 12 grades in the 2000 and 2021 school year. The crazy part is a year before that, in the 2019 and 2022 school year, it was 2% and went down to 1.3%. And that's Black males. There are over 3 million teachers in the United States, but only 25.7% of them are men. At my agency right now, I am the only person that identifies or looks like a male, as I do identify as non-binary. And it's in social services. At my previous social service agency in Pennsylvania, I was the only Black male and the third male in the agency. A lot of our social service staff, a lot of our educators are women and are white women. What do we think, what does that play a role on our children of color? They don't see themselves represented. Or maybe people don't have the lens to go ahead and see that particular child right then and there, based off our own stereotypes and biases, because you're human. Understandable. The reason why seeing us helps, and the reason I frame this particular slide is why seeing us helps. And I want to go ahead and state why seeing myself and Jamie helps, why seeing other Black males help, and why seeing our male students help. One, because we have to recognize where people are and who can help them best. We're noticing there's a lot of things going on in everything. And it has been research that has proven that male presence, or whatever the case may be, can go ahead and increase behavior. It can go ahead and regulate certain things. And it has been, a great tool. Providing space to be confident. Again, providing a space, going back to that cultural safety space, providing a space where men can show up and express their emotions. Mm-hmm. Because, Jamie mentioned that, toxic masculinity aspect. However, toxic masculinity, unfortunately, is perpetuated by women as well. Not only do men contribute to it, but women also contribute to this thing, because it's something that has been engraved into the social dynamic of how we exist in general. So when it says certain stereotypes for men, like men can't cry, men are supposed to do this, men are supposed to take care of the household, those are stereotypes that are being reinforced to that particular man that may not fit in everything. So that's not providing a space where they can be confident, because at that point, we're just telling them they're not anything because they don't fit these particular things to be a man. And it's way more to being a man than whatever that's outlined in everything. As well as some research has shown, presence of male teachers may help promote alternative, nonviolent, and gender equitable versions of masculinity. So having that just flow and what that may look like is important. Men are often a hidden factor in the families we work with. Sometimes in some of these marginalized communities, the presence of the father is not there. This is a known thing. So having an agency, having a school system where there is male presence to go ahead and model what that may look like and everything can go ahead and be beneficial for that particular child. Can go ahead and be beneficial, just, maintaining that rapport and building that particular rapport. Again, representation matters. And then having a diverse perspective overall when it comes to males, females, non-binary, anything in between, and everything can overall enhance the decision-making process and drive positive outcomes. Again, for me personally, I've been in several spaces where I don't know if me showing up authentically me is okay. What parts of my identity do I have to go ahead and sit in, and what parts of my identity do I not have to sit in? Well, the one biggest thing that I'm very proud of myself and why I stand on where I stand and why I'm happy to be where I am, because I'm also allowing other queer Black men, queer Black people, queer people of color in general, to know that you can go ahead and do it. You can go ahead and get to where I got and everything. Because me growing up, I didn't see myself represented. Mm-hmm. I'm a first generation college student. My parents didn't go to college and everything. I'm the oldest of all my sisters. So I have this thing, being in a Black family, like where everything, all the responsibility falls on me. Like, Charles, you have to go ahead and do this. You have to. And if you don't, you're a failure. And then I'm navigating, a world where if I don't do this and everything, then I'm this person. If I do it this way, then I'm this person. Oh, Charles, you're ghetto, or the X, Y, and Z. There's a lot of different things that not only am I trying to break in my household, as a Black man, as a Black person in general, but also just navigating life, and what that looks like going forward.
And
Jamie?
so it's important to understand that what you're hearing from both Charles and myself is we're talking about how people spoke to us. We're giving you the general context of what it meant to us when we heard it. Because I want to go back to that idea of duality. And Charles just mentioned the idea of how he felt. Could I show up? Normally, I have a background behind me. Today, I chose not to. Because we always say, bring your whole selves to work. This is part of my whole selves. You can't make out all the pictures behind me, but most of them are family, because this is why I'm here, despite what people either said or thought. Remember, communication not only happens in front of you, but it also happens behind you. When people are talking about you to other people, or when you are talking about other African-American males or diverse students, how are they being perceived? What's being said? Because that perception can lead to reality in those conversations, in those spaces. You heard Charles say, I didn't know if I could show up. Me being me, a lot of times it meant maybe I need to be quiet. I talk with my hands. I'm still in New York. Maybe I need to pull that back some because the people in the South might be a little nervous. I might need to smile a little bit more. I don't know if any of you all have ever been to New York, but that's not really what we do when we outside. But it is about how we engage. It is about how people talk about us. Oh my God, you're from there. So this idea of representation matters now that and I mean all of us, are in these rooms or at these tables. We have a duty and responsibility to make sure that when these students are being spoken to, when our coworkers are being talked to, that we understand where they're coming from and we gain that insight. And that's what part of what we're trying to do today, but give it from our perspective so you have some context to it. This is why representation matters. And I appreciate, and I saw Brenda's comment in the screen here, and I appreciate you being able to say that, because we understand that separate is not equal, even in our communication. So I appreciate that and wanted to make sure I acknowledge that, because that's important. Understanding where people came from, how they were spoken to, and now you're expecting everything to change just because you're a quote unquote nice person. Remember, this communication is two ways. Understanding how they speak, why they speak is important.
And one thing I do want to go ahead and mention, like the one thing why this particular professional development is so unique to be delivered by myself and Jamie, as one, we both identify as Black people. However, at the end of the day, yes, we are where we are, and it's a lot of great things that we go ahead and do. But once we walk out of our office, once we walk out of our house, to the rest of the world, we're still Black men. Regardless, go ahead.
The talk, when you say people still look at us and still see Black men, the talk, that idea of how parents tell their children, and this is communication again, African-American and Latino males, how they talk to their kids before they go out. My dad gave it to me before I left college, before I left to go to college, and after I graduated. It was a definitive, remember who you are when you walk out the door. That, Charles, is where I think is also another piece of the significance in explaining that. I can't explain how many coworkers I had to explain what the talk was. And then I got asked to do a presentation on the talk. And so when I showed them the slide, they meant, no, we meant like, how do you talk in classrooms? Because all they said to me was, Jamie, we want you to talk about the talk. This was really at the height of the Floyd murder. And it was like, okay, well, yeah, I'll just explain how that works in African-American communities. Because all my buddies had it. None of the white colleagues had it. But my buddies, we had this talk with our parents. Either their mother gave it to them, their father gave it to them, and an uncle or an aunt gave them that talk. It was always an elder speaking to someone younger. Again, this is the idea of communication and what happens and how some of us are trained to hear different parts of conversations.
Yes, because some of us, again, some of us, how we were raised and different messages that have been reinforced, we assume that, oh, this means this. I have to treat this person this way and everything. However, as you can see, Jamie and I, again, we share the same identity as Black people, but our interests are different. We show up in spaces different. We do things different and everything. However, the common thread is, to the rest of the world, we're still seen as the same. We don't have any individuality, but everyone else has a sense of individuality. Everyone else deserves to be respected. But as men, sometimes we don't. And I want everyone else to know, I know this conversation has been focused on our identities as African Americans. However, this is transferable to just men in general and how all men show up. Because if we go ahead and talk about white men and what that looks like, we do have a stereotype and connotation against white men. Some of us may assume like all white men are toxic, X, Y, and Z and everything, which we may not want them in our agencies because of X, Y, and Z. So again, there's so many stereotypes that we do have for all men. And at the end of the day, like, I do hope this conversation just helps us kind of reframe our own individual settings, our own workspaces, our own offices, whatever they may look like for you individually, and be like, what can I go ahead and do to change this going forward? Whether that is just changing your overall mindset, about like, hey, like, how am I, approaching this, particular male and everything? Hey, what about looking at the diversity at my agency? How many males do I have on site, and everything? What does that necessarily look like? And again, just having a conversation, with another male, like, hey, like, I would like to go ahead and know your experience and everything. Having that very talk. Something people don't talk to us. People don't talk to men. People think, again, going back to that slide about how people feel about us. People feel that we don't communicate. We're uncaring, we're emotionless. So that's why you don't see us in education. That's why you don't see us in social services. But also too, these are the same messages, you all, that are being reinforced into our young males, which are causing them not want to go into education, causing them not want to go into social services, because we're telling them like, they're all these things. They're not caring. So how can they believe in themselves, build that confidence in themselves to go ahead and be like, I can go ahead and help some kids. I can go ahead and work in education. I can be a teacher. How can I also want to do this and everything if I don't see myself represented? What is that?
Even down to the stereotypes, right? We're all supposed to want boys. I have 3 girls, and I am unnecessarily proud of that. And I say unnecessary because they're my girls. I love them to death. The idea is, how do you deal with that? It's like, oh, and when I say I'm a girl dad, I mean it. I've done the Girl Scout cookies and everything else. I feel like I should have the sash and the vest because that engagement is there. But what do they say? What is communication? Oh, you don't have any sons? Oh, no, I'm good. My girls are going to be proud, strong African-American women, period. I don't need boys. I got them. When we communicate, how is that perceived? You need someone to carry on your name. They can do it for me. They need not to have to stand on anyone. They got it. This is what we're talking about with this communication. That is where Charles and I sit. Even though we just intersected at Penn State, our intersection grows more than just the one space. We have a passion for this, and it's why we were excited to do this topic. It's why, and Charles, I asked you to say it, but I'm gonna say it. It's why it didn't take us long to put this together. Because this is where we are, and this is what we felt was so important to do. So as you can see, it is time for question and answer and discussion, and I see some things, and I couldn't go without acknowledging Robert. Appreciate that. Appreciate the Bronx statement. Got to recognize it's not many of us out here, but we wanted to open it up for conversation and questions, and just putting it in the chat. And Ann, I saw you come on, so I don't know if you got.
Yep. Excuse me, I came on and then I couldn't talk. Just wanted to say thank you both for all of that. And just to reiterate that folks can unmute themselves to ask questions, type questions in the chat. I just wanted to highlight some things folks have been saying. throughout our chat, a lot of people going back and reviewing the teachers they had and realizing things they didn't realize before. All right, we have a question from Melissa. What are some general approaches a person can take to create greater cultural competency?
I mean, one, asking questions. It is not wrong to go ahead and ask a question, and also asking a question in an empathetic approach. Let me go ahead and rephrase that, because us sometimes asking a question and just to a certain person, not understanding the sensitivity of the topic or whatever the case may be, can be completely wrong. But if you're curious about, someone's culture, someone's identity and different things like that, and you're in an environment where the question can go ahead and be asked, ask that question for further exploration, and going ahead and giving that caveat, like, hey, like, I just don't understand and I really want to know more. And if you need to go ahead and say, like, I'm not trying to be mean in everything. I know some people can take that wrong. Some people can take that good and everything. But if you feel that is something that you need to go ahead and just fuel you to go ahead and ask that particular question, that is fine. And as well, too, to go ahead and reach that cultural competence, acknowledge and realize that you may not know.
Yeah, I think all of that is valid. And I think creating safe spaces, the ability to create a safe space not only helps the person that you're asking the question of, but it also helps you. Remember, when you're talking to people, people know when you're asking a question out of sincerity or you're just trying to be that person. It is when you hear the tone. It is like what Charles said, it could be over a cup of coffee, like, look, I just want to understand this. I have friends who are Jewish. I'm using this for my cultural comments. I had to ask them questions about Purim because I heard of it, I understood it, but I didn't get it. So it was just like, hey, can you tell me about this? I had Muslim friends that I asked about LC. I wanted to understand because I knew I needed to know, not I wanted to know, I needed to know. But it created that safe space. And it wasn't just a one conversation. I talk to people on a regular basis. So this may mean you need to get outside of your friend group, outside of those 5 or 6 people that you normally have coffee with or grab a cigarette break with. This might mean you need to expand that and just be able to ask questions. And you'll get, Google and all of that helps. But when you get it from the individual, you will get more out of it because you'll have the opportunity to learn more from their conversation.
Thank you both very much for that answer. And Tina added, don't be afraid to be uncomfortable or vulnerable when seeking out cultural competency. Exactly. Another question we have from Maggie, who also wants to thank you both for the presentation and the work. Can you share a little bit about why you use the terms cultural competency versus cultural responsiveness? And do you believe there to be a difference in those terms? And what do you believe that difference to be?
So for me, the reason I've used cultural competence and cultural competence and cultural responsiveness are usually always in the same or linked together, or sometimes you see them cultural competence / responsiveness and what that looks like. For me, it's just understanding the root words of certain things is why I use competence in general. As if we go ahead and define competence, it's just the overall ideology of just knowing information of what that looks like. When that whole responsiveness, like, I feel like that goes more into the humility aspect, is going to the next step. You're responding and everything, but that's not what cultural competence is. You have a basis and understanding of these particular people, but you don't know everything. So you can't respond to this if you don't know everything. And that's not the goal. When going to cultural humility, it's really just overall that, self-critique, as well as just that commitment to that self-evaluation. Like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know everything, but I'm also going to go ahead and work to go in and get there. So for me, cultural humility is more, and cultural responsiveness is more along that line, while cultural competence, again, just focusing on the overall competence of that, if that makes sense. Jamie, did you have anything to add there?
No, I thought I was gonna say it better.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And we have a question from Kim. Can you give some examples of creating safe spaces?
I think the first thing that is very integral to creating a safe place is evaluating how are you showing up to that space.
Mm.
You cannot provide a safe space if you are not authentically being yourself in that space as well too. In order to allow someone to be vulnerable with you, you also have to be willing to be vulnerable with them too. You know, talking about any topic when it comes to identity, culture, anything like that, it's vulnerable. When talking about your kids and different, those are vulnerable topics to go ahead and have. So how are we expecting a person to come to us to do so if that particular space, you know, if we're not also showing up? So I believe that is the first thing to go ahead and do to create that particular space, as well as spend that beginning time. Like you can't just create a safe space today. Like just like, oh, today is my safe place. Safe space. That's not how it works. Establish that rapport, get to know that person a little more, you know, see how can I, what are creative ways to go ahead and maybe benefit this particular space? What are something that makes this person uncomfortable? Learn to go ahead and establish a rapport to get to know that person. And then that safe place is starting to go ahead and get set. Put those rules, you know, go ahead and put those expectations into the space and everything. And it's okay. Jamie, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, on that, I was just going to say the idea of vulnerability, of being someone that you know you can say things that can be corrected, and being when you say giving an example, when you say I don't know, can you help me understand? And if you don't, it's okay. Making sure that the other individual on the other side of the table knows that they don't have to respond. A lot of times when we go and we ask individuals a question, if I were to ask Ann a question, I'm expecting her to give me a response right then and there. But we don't take into account the humanity of her being able to say, look, I don't want to talk about it. And I don't want to use the word fragility because people hear that and they say, oh, we can't. No, they may not just want to talk about that space, but creating that safe space of saying, I'm allowing you not to. And understand, I'm putting it on us. I am allowing this. I am working within this. I'm working within your space of understanding so that I'm not overpressing. I'm not overcompensating. And the idea of sharing who you are. That, and Charles said a lot of it. I'm just trying not to repeat what you said, Charles. A lot of it already, being vulnerable, being open, and allowing people to make mistakes without, quote unquote, canceling them. Now, people will say things incorrectly a lot, but helping them to understand why it was wrong. We can't just cancel. And we have to make sure that if they apologize, we accept their apology at face value. Now, sometimes they're insincere, so I'm not saying they accept that. But I am saying put the effort into it on both sides. There must be grace on both sides. There must be education on both sides. And Kim, I saw Professor Kim's hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Kim, if you want to go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, I'm loving this conversation and discussion. And I just wanted to say that it's very interesting when we're talking about safe spaces, because I'm currently taking the ACUE Cultural Belonging course. And one of the panelists in one of the videos was talking about safe spaces and saying that they don't even call them safe spaces anymore, that they call them vulnerable spaces, which is all about what you're talking about. And the reason why they said that they don't necessarily call them safe spaces is because even, you know, those of us who are like working with students and people, that we don't necessarily know every single thing about that individual at the time and what they're going through. So, you know, there are certain things, you know, that, you know, may be said or whatever that wouldn't necessarily be considered safe, but because that situation is vulnerable, you can freely share those things and come to, you know, a good place. So I just wanted to say, you know, thank you so much for sharing those things.
Yeah, I think it's just, and just to reiterate, it's about bringing yourself to the space. And one of the things is like I try to blend in my office. Like you can see some of the stuff behind me. You can't see it all because it's a ton of stuff. But behind me, this is a safe space. So when a student walks in, they understand that I am bringing me to work. When they see me at Walmart, they'll see me with my kids. They'll see me out. They'll see me in different places. But I am still me. And that's what's important, for you to still be you, so that when people come and talk, they see the sincerity, they see the authenticity of it. They're engaging who they know to engage. It's not something that when they see you at work, it's going to be like, oh, okay, this is his work base. Like, I don't have a work voice. This is how it sounds. Be that.
Thank you very much. And if I could just interject for one moment, we have some conversations going on in the chat about the safe space versus brave space conversation. And Dr. Walker shared a link that is very helpful to continue that conversation. So if you want to get a little bit deeper into the safe versus brave space, we'll go ahead and check out that link. We do have a raised hand, but we did have one question come in before that raised hand. So I'm just going to throw that in there first, if that's okay. Just a general question in the context of this presentation. If someone sees someone experiencing microaggressions out in the world, what are your recommendations for stepping in?
I think one, you have to be careful in that moment. Because if person, so I'm going to go A and B person. If person A is experiencing microaggressions, you have to be careful about just jumping in. There are points when people want to stand up for themselves. It may take them a second. They want the support, but you have to be careful not to just be riding in to save the day. It is akin sometimes when I talk to my guys about what is being chivalrous and what's overdoing it. Like, you don't have to run in and save everybody. Some people can save themselves. So when it comes to the microaggression, if you hear it and it's a berating and you see the person pulling away, again, recognize the situation and then be able to move in. And sometimes it can be as simple as, hey, what'd you say? Or I heard you just say this to them. Did you understand what that meant? Do you understand how they're feeling? And it can be said in a way where the person, the aggressor, the B person, the aggressor in this, will either back up or they will direct it toward you. Now, again, I say that because when I do step in, I do try to make it so that it's directed towards me. And then I am stepping in and I can either give that person shelter or give that person a chance to recover. And they may say, no, I got it. And then you just step back. But it is about creating that break, creating that space where there's a moment to breathe. There's a moment for the other person to either engage or to pull back. But again, look to the individual to see what they need. Because sometimes you all have been in these situations just like I have. It may take you a minute to be like, wait, I didn't really hear that, did I? To engage, and you want to take that breath to make sure, and also it could help de-escalate the situation. So it's just about, I think, stepping in and assessing, but making sure you're helping, not harming the other individual. Charles, I'll push back to you if that was on task.
I think that was great. I didn't have anything to go ahead and add.
Thank you both. Brenda, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you. I really don't have a question, but I'm immeasurably grateful for this presentation. It was, listen, I understand, and I'm very proud of Charles English. I was the assistant principal at Cass Tech probably before his time, but you are certainly representing quite well, sir. I just want you to know that. Thank you so much, both of you, for this outstanding presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
See, Charles, I told you should have put Detroit in big letters. I told you.
That's awesome. All right, let me just comb through the chat here. That was the end of our questions, but if we have anybody else, we have a moment here.
And also, please feel free to go ahead and email myself, or Dr. Campbell, if you have any questions or anything like that, or if you just want to go ahead and chat and just have a one-on-one follow-up conversation, we are more than welcome to go ahead and support.
We do want to thank you for your patience and your time. I know this is over lunch for many of you, so we do want to thank you sharing your lunch break with us. And like Charles said, please reach out if we can be of service. We're happy to help.
And just to jump in there, I included our general website. Everyone's email is up on the screen here, and you can find the links to our future registrations on asaoe.org. We also have some links to recordings, which we are currently working on, so those will be updated as we go. And we are also on YouTube, ASAOE on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe. I've always wanted to say that. So with that, I will stop talking and I will give it about a minute here before we close down. And thank you all for joining us today.
Have a great one, everyone.
Definitely. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jamie and Charles. You guys are amazing. Thank you, Anne, for being fantastic.
Thank you. This was so great. Thank you so much. And Melissa, you rock.
Saw pictures of you on the internet, Cam. You look amazing.
Thank you.
All right, we have most